would like to call this regular meeting of May 10th, 2024 to order. And I would like to thank our live simultaneous Spanish interpreters for joining us. We are also live streaming our meeting. Please stand and join us this afternoon in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It has been brought to my attention that we may have made an error in the approval of our consent agenda last night. The consent agenda contained items 8.01 through 8.25. Due to a typographical error in the script, we only approved items 8.01 through 8.11. I'd like to entertain a motion to amend today's agenda by adding a reconsideration of last night's vote. Is there a motion to amend this afternoon's meeting agenda to reconsider our approval of the May 9th, 2024 consent agenda?
I move to amend this afternoon's meeting agenda to reconsider our approval of the May 9th, 2024 consent agenda as proposed in board docs.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any objection? It has been moved and seconded to amend the agenda for the special meeting of May 10, 2024 as presented to include a reconsideration of last night's consent agenda vote. Roll call, please, Ms. Zavada.
Ms. Applegate?
Yes.
Ms. Kenworthy?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Ms. Reed?
Yes.
Dr. Barnes?
Yeah. Should we have taken attendance? Should we do that now? Let's do that now.
You
Okay.
did miss that. Yes.
So roll call?
Ms. Applegate?
Here.
Ms. Kenworthy?
Here.
Ms. Parker?
Here.
Ms. Reed?
Here.
Dr. Barnes?
Okay, sorry for getting out of order here. So we do have a motion to approve the May 10th agenda as amended. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the agenda as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any objection? Roll call, please, Ms. Zavada.
Ms. Applegate?
Yes.
Ms. Kenworthy?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Ms. Reed?
Yes.
Dr. Barda?
Finally, the amended agenda is approved. Do I have a motion to reconsider the May 9th consent agenda vote and revise the decision to cover items 8.01 through 8.25 inclusive as presented in board docs?
I move to reconsider our May 9th consent agenda vote to clarify that the approval is inclusive of items 8.01 through 8.25 as presented in board docs.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any objection? Roll call, please, Ms. Zavada.
Ms. Applegate?
Yes.
Ms. Kenworthy?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Ms. Reed?
Yes.
Dr. Barda?
The May 9th consent agenda vote decision has been revised. And we are now on to the study session. Our first agenda item this afternoon is reserved for the Board of Education and the public to receive and consider the 2024-25 proposed budget. As a reminder to the board and our listening public, information and updates on the development of the 2024-25 budget have been presented for several months, including most recently at the April 3rd board meeting. These budget updates included financial updates for the current year as well as preliminary budget information for the coming year. The public is invited to view the 2024-25 proposed budget as presented in board docs, which is also available on the district's financial transparency webpage. Any person paying school taxes towards Jefferson County Public Schools may file or register via email or via mail, comment or objection to this budget prior to its adoption. Additionally, members of the public may address the board in person at the June 13th, 2024 board regular session by signing up for public comment. Currently, the board plans to adopt the 2024-25 budget at the June 13th, 2024 meeting, though the date may shift if necessary. Before I hand this over to Ms. Copeland, Superintendent Dorland, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you, President Parker. It's a very robust presentation, and I'd like to make sure we can get going and get into it. I might jump in during the presentation, but for now, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Copeland, and we'll get going.
Great. Good afternoon, board members. Today, Mr. Salmons, Ms. Rosario, and I have the privilege of presenting the budgets developed by our school leaders, department leaders, and fellow cabinet leaders. Combined, these budgets reflect our plans to provide a world-class education that prepares all Jeffco students for bright and successful futures as local and global citizens. My role, and by extension, the role of the Budget Services team, is to compile budgetary plans and make them transparent, accessible, and understandable. We do this in service of many different decision makers in this district, but we do not make the decisions about how to spend our resources. Today's proposed budget reflects decisions made by more than 200 people, and ultimately the review and approval of our superintendent, Ms. Dorland. Ultimately, this budget is a proposal until it is adopted and appropriated by you, the board. This is the third budget that Mr. Salmons and I have collaborated to present and prepare on behalf of Jeffco. Quick history, our first budget was the 22-23 school year, in which the district adopted a wholly new salary scale for our 5,000-ish teachers. We concluded negotiations around that salary scale after the budget was adopted, and thus we amended the budget. Our second budget was for the current school year, the one we're in right now, 23-24, in which the district consolidated 15 elementary schools into other schools and made many staffing changes in order to trim the budget by approximately $20 million. Over the course of the last 2 years, the district has received feedback from many stakeholders, some of whom spoke with you last night, that they would prefer the district to expend every budgeted dollar. Setting a budget as an estimated total spend represents a shift in our budgeting practices. At various points today, we will discuss assumptions baked into this budget so that we treat it as an estimated total spend as opposed to an authorized maximum amount. I encourage you to ask questions to make sure you are clear on the probability of spending our FY25 budget as presented, because it is different than prior years. We will pause after presenting the general fund revenue and expense to invite your questions on the general fund budget, and then we will wrap up with additional time for questions on the budgets for the various other funds, as well as the multi-year forecast. So don't feel like you need to remember all your questions for the whole time. Also, you are invited to interrupt us at any point with a question or a clarification. Today's presentation provides our best estimates as of April 29th, which was 2 weeks ago. The June budget will reflect things that happen between the 29th and as close to the end of May as we can get, which is our sort of cutoff time frame. Any changes beyond that date would be reflected in a revised budget. So I just wanted to make that clarification. With that, I'm going to skip the overview because I already sort of previewed it and go straight into the calendar. Usually when I talk through this calendar, I talk a lot about the work that departments do at various points in the year. But today I want to focus on your role and when it is you engage with the budget. The board adopts and appropriates the budget in June. That's next month. This provides delegate authority to the district to move forward with our plans and spend resources up to the total appropriation, which is a figure greater than the total budget. Throughout the year, decisions about how to spend on specific items are made by leadership according to a set of delegate authorities. The board adopts a revised budget and appropriation in January, typically. These 2 points in time, June and January, are the 2 moments where the board is making budget decisions. Other board decisions throughout the year, including contract approvals, are not budgetary authorizations or decisions. The one exception is adoption and appropriation of an amended budget in September, which sometimes happens. You can see it on the wheel. In this coming year, we do plan to bring forward an amended budget, and I'll refer to this again later in the presentation, because we are consolidating certain funds into the general fund. So we will need to restate our general fund budget and appropriation to reflect that consolidation. And that consolidation must, by rule of accounting gods, happen as of July 1st. It cannot happen today. So that is why the sequence will go in that direction. So with that on the calendar, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Salmons.
Thank you, Ms. Copeland. Can everybody hear me? Okay, a little bit higher. Thank you. All right, so first we're going to cover the enrollment and revenue coming up. Okay, so the district membership, which we're showing here, which is the actual number of students in our building, is forecasted for school year 24-25 to just be under 63,800 students with district managed schools. This represents a 12% decrease in enrollment since 2019-2020. The district membership count will continue to decline around 900 students a year for the next 3 years as the smaller grades matriculate through the high schools. Charter membership has been fairly consistent the past years. We don't normally project for enrollment for the coming years for charter schools, so we generally hold them constant to slightly having a little bit of a growth in the forecasting process.
Okay, I already have a question. When we look from this year to next year, the decrease in the, well, it's green, between the 64,823 students for the current fiscal year and then next year, the projection, it's only 6 students less in that bucket. Do you see what I'm talking about? Okay, so for
President Parker, can I interject for just a second? The numbers are super small and they may be hard to read. So the purple bit is 64,800 and the green bit is 63,800.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, those are so small.
No, thank you.
Awesome. All right. Okay, so we've been showing this graph in April to illustrate the district managed schools matriculation patterns. As we have stated before, this data illustrates that the grade level enrollment has leveled off around 4,500 students on average from kinder to 8th grade. 9th grade shows a predictable increase of around 500 students. Currently, 10th through 12th grade are around 5,900 students. This will decline to around 5,000 students as the smaller 9th grade moves through the high school system. All right, so we've also presented a very similar slide in February and March and April budget development updates. This slide has been updated to display the FY 23-24 actuals compared to the assumptions applied in 24-25. As you can see, CPI is dropping from 8% in FY 23-24 to 5.2% in FY 24-25. This 5.2% is a final number and will be applied to next year's School Finance Act since it is based on calendar year 23. The Budget Stabilization Factor, or BS factor, is a state budget tool that reduces the amount of total funding for each school district. This factor will be completely bought down and removed starting in FY 24-25, which is a $12 million positive for Jeffco. FY 24-25 actual membership is assumed to decrease around 950 students based on the district's matriculation pattern that we just reviewed. Funded count for 24-25 is decreasing 1,900 students compared to 2,400 students in 23-24. We are assuming SPED enrollment holds flat and interest earning is expected to decrease around $2 million next fiscal year.
Really quick, is the actual membership decreased? Is that inclusive of charters or no?
That's just the district membership.
Thank you.
Okay, so with these assumptions, the FY 24-25 general fund is estimated to increase $32 million from FY 23-24, which is a 3.5% overall increase. This results in a total per pupil revenue increase of around 5% from FY 23-24. I'd also like to point out here that 53% of our total general fund revenue is received from local taxes. Okay, so $32 million increase is a lot of money. And to help frame this, we thought it would be helpful to show the historical total revenues starting back from FY 18-19. The $32 million is in line with the year-over-year increases since 21-22, which has grown on average around $43 million annually. Again, one major factor that helped increase the district revenue for next year was the elimination of the budget stabilization factor, which was introduced about 15 years ago. Okay, I'm going to turn over to Ms. Copeland to talk through the unknowns that may be impacting
Yeah,
revenue.
can I pause you there? Sorry, I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and I appreciate that we get to have this today when I'm a little bit fresher and not at the end of last night. So thank you. It's so nice, fully caffeinated. So that's surprising to me. For some reason, I expected the annual revenues to go down, just kind of in the wake we're always kind of fighting. So is that what you expected to see, I guess, is one question. And is it really that our expenses are growing with our revenues that becomes the challenge for us? Maybe that's an end of the presentation question.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think we often talk to you about two different component parts moving in two different directions.
Yeah.
Because really our revenue, at its most simplest form, is a count of students multiplied by a rate per student. And so what you're seeing in the historic analysis is that even though the count was going down, so that part was of the equation going down, this part was going up more than enough to offset this. And that's what produces a net revenue increase.
Is that because of the average?
It's in part because the average is, there are many different reasons that funded count decline was not enough to fully offset the rate increase. What you'll see in our multi-year forecast when I get there is that dynamic is starting to pivot. So that even though this is still going up, this is now going down enough that they are offsetting.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So is that because of the thing that we've been talking about all along, where the state was sort of building a runway for our declining enrollment? So they were counting us higher and doing the 5-year average so that we wouldn't sort of hit that cliff. But now we're hitting the cliff, so it's equalizing. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, if Mr. Salmons will go back to slide 5, the rate of change matters, right? And so what you're seeing is the height of the bar, for example, in 1920 was much higher than in 2021 and 2021 versus 21-22. So when did the actual declines happen? We're just kind of catching up to them now. And then they do start to level off, right? Like the actual amounts are only going down by about 1,000 in those middle years, if you will. And so that's part of what's happening is we're catching up, and that 5-year averaging has helped us a lot, but those highest enrollment years are now peeling off, right? I shut off my mic. Maybe that was a gift. Unknowns? All right. Speaking to unknowns, many things are unknown. So things continue to change, even after, obviously, the June adoption of the budget that impacts revenue. And so please take all of our revenue projections with a grain of salt. Actual counts will change. And in fact, people think of the October count as the moment when we know our actual count. That's not true. There's additional counts that come out later, including our count of students who are at risk, our count of students with disabilities, et cetera. So there's multiple counts that are happening all year long that impact revenue, and it all gets trued up at the end with the state. We have certain projections around our interest earnings next year. You've heard me talk repeatedly over the past year and a half or so. We are in an unprecedented interest rate environment where we are earning more on our cash than we normally will. We have to make assumptions about when that earning rate is going to revert to its historic levels. But we have no perfect line of sight into the future. So obviously we just did the best we could. For FY26 and beyond, this slide was written a couple weeks ago. The legislature has proposed a new school finance formula that has now passed. When we bring you the June revisions, if you will, and that presentation will be much shorter and focused only on that which changes from today. One of the changes from today will actually be our projected revenue in FY26 and FY27, which will go up a little based on that legislation. Oh my goodness. Okay, we're going to go to expense, and then again, at the end of expense, we can rehash any part of general fund you guys want, or enrollment, etc. Okay, so one of the core assumptions driving expenditures and year-over-year change in any school district is always what are we doing for our employees' compensation, because 87% of what we spend is on people. And there's two big parts of that equation, how many people and how much do we pay each person. So again, we have to develop this presentation as of a moment in time, and we developed it as of the moment in time where our offer to JCEA was a step and 4% COLA. Okay, so every number you're going to see from henceforward in this presentation reflects that offer that was on the table. Yes.
Quick question. Does the health insurance number, is that current to where we were as of last night?
Nope.
No, so this will not reflect the discussion that the district bargaining team had related to a percentage model for benefits contributions over the next 2 years. It does not reflect that conversation that did occur at the JCEA bargaining table last night. So it was the previous version of what the district had proposed.
Great. And given that, negotiations are at different points, for simplicity, myself and the budget team assumed that same compensation increase across all employee groups, because that seemed the correct assumption to us in order to present you with figures for the proposed budget. But do know that by the time we come back in June, we will come back with official, where is it we are, to the best of our ability. Hopefully we are somewhere. And then other numbers on here will also have changed. Those additional comp adjustments, much of that is negotiated based on the interests of either unit. And so that number will continue to move as well. And the superintendent just referred to, we continue to negotiate our health insurance benefit. In prior presentations, we've talked about the reallocation of current year budget estimates towards new things. And consistent with my remarks at the beginning, we're approaching the budget in a new way going forward, which is the budget is now an estimate of what we will spend. It is not the full authorization. And by doing so, things that used to be budgeted in different ways, we're now sort of budgeting towards these new important programs, continuing some of our ESSER 3 programs, making important investments in our schools, increasing student-based budgeting so that schools could afford more staff, which is a change we made way back in December, to be perfectly frank. All that is possible because of our new budgeting approach. Here's a snapshot of our major investments through reallocation aligned to the priorities in Jeffco Thrives. So quite a bit focused on our learners, our future, including curricular resources that we, on a short-term basis, funded through ESSER 3. That's why it has an asterisk next to it. And now we'll fund in an ongoing way through the general fund. We're providing assistant principals in our elementary schools with certain types of SPED Center programs. We have continued an adjustment to our guest teacher daily rate that was necessary and important and temporarily funded by ESSER 3. We'll be continuing an expansion in Tech for Ed around our devices and supports and software for our students and their learning environments. And I just alluded to an SBB investment we made. All those really directly aligned to Priority 1. For Priority 3, our operations, our foundation, we're making some investments in student transportation and cybersecurity. Those are relatively small, but those are opportunities to improve what we're doing district-wide. And then for our community, our legacy, we will be continuing an ESSER investment in middle school campus security officers that we think really benefits our middle schools and our both our students and families ultimately in the community. We have some newcomer family liaisons that we will be funding as a new investment for next year. And then the sort of community-facing resource updates is a mouthful, which in plain English has to do with our website and some of the surveys we now send out to make sure we understand the perceptions of our students and our families. So we often get asked, where is money spent? And that is such a tricky question because I think to an independent observer and any of the listening public, they think of the question of where as a location. You are either spending it in a school building or you're spending it not in a school building, for example, in the Ed Center. Regrettably, or I don't know, maybe it's a good thing, our budgets don't line up that way. We either budget at a school budget, which you see in the pink, or a departmental budget in the green, but those do not correspond to location. Much of the green is spent in a school location. And so, Director Applegate, I know you asked about our SEL staffing last night. All of the budget for that is in the green. However, it is deployed very much so in schools. And so we did our best to estimate what portion of green is actually spent in a school site specifically. And we think it's about 52% of that $333 million. An additional 36% of departmental budgets are for operations and shared services benefiting schools. So an example of something in that category where, again, it's more school-based than anything else is our utilities budget or the transfer, certain types of IT investments, et cetera, that show up in our general fund budget as a department, but are deployed in schools. So I just wanted to clarify this distinction in the pie chart really is not lined up to location.
So can I clarify on the utilities piece? The utilities for all of our school buildings are in that green part.
Correct.
Okay. So our students are staying warm because of money spent in the green.
Correct.
Sorry, lots of questions. So when we think about the capital fund,
Yes.
does that, which is things happening at all of our buildings
Yes.
up and down the road, is that also in the green, or is that part of the, because the school allocation is what gets sent to schools to manage, yes?
Correct. It is in neither. You have
Thank you.
named an amount of money outside the pie chart.
Got it.
So again, if you sum these in your head, you'll get to $869 million. Or if you did it on a calculator, hopefully you get the same thing. And that is not our full general fund budget, right? The general fund budget includes a transfer to the capital reserve fund. All the activity that is capital investments happens in the capital reserve fund. And many of our other funds are supported through transfers. So the transfer budget very much matters, but it is not a department and it's not a school. And so when I speak to fund consolidation later in this presentation, one of the things I'm excited about this accounting change is that we will actually be pulling some things into the general fund in such a way that they now will show up in either department or school, and they'll show up as the actual expense they are, as opposed to a transfer. And people are like, well, what's a transfer? Is that people? Is that materials? What is it? So I think it will improve transparency. They're transfers. Okay. Oh, of course.
I have a question on a previous slide. Would you rather just me wait till the end? I'm fine.
Whenever, please.
Oh, on the one before this, sorry, I feel like I'm echoing. Am I? Sorry, one more before it. That 20 million, I know it's come up a couple times and like the FAC asked about it. What I'm curious about, like I really appreciate being able to like find is probably the wrong word, but like identify those funds so that we can do those things. And I'm curious, like what kind of method did you use to identify where we could get $20 million to do those things? And I know, and I've heard you say a few times before, it's money that was spent on other things. So I understand that it came from somewhere and now we want to reallocate it for these things. And one reason I'm really interested is because when we talk about compensation and going up by these huge millions of dollars. And so, and a few years ago when we approved that, then it came with a, I don't know what the right word is on this either, but suggestion that, or I don't know if it was a directive to find to look for where we could find money to shore up the budget. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That process that we did. So we're going to have to do that, right? If we go into these compensation levels that are so high up there. So my question is like, what did you use to find, I don't want to say find because I know it was there, but like to reallocate and build the strategy to do that. Where did it come from? And like, are we looking at places where we're budgeted but didn't underspend, or just where did that money come from? But I don't need to know exactly one from, more like I'm wondering how can we keep doing that?
That's great question.
Yeah.
So again, it's a very important one. So thank you for asking it. Our job is to be as transparent and clear and understandable as we can be, so you understand what decisions have been made by decision makers that are not the two of us. It comes from entering a negative expense assumption into the budget. So it means that the same dollar is authorized to be spent in two places. That's exactly where it comes from. So we are not revoking authorization over here, and we are providing authorization over here by entering in an assumed underspend, which is the word you used. And so to forecast an underspend, we do a ton of detailed analysis about budgets, actuals, et cetera, et cetera. We look at these massive spreadsheets. I say we, it's really Mr. Salmons, and do our best to figure out when all of our new employees show up each August, what do they look like? Are they step 2? Are they step 12? So it's all the unknowns. We try and analyze those on a year-over-year basis to make them somewhat predictable. And that's how we come up with a forecast for an underspend that enables us to take the same dollar and authorize it towards two different uses. Yeah.
I probably have too many questions, but so like, what's the threshold? How far can we go with kind of estimating an underspend before we're like, we don't know enough to.
Yeah, we'll find out. I think, again, I've signaled that we have shifted our approach to budgeting in response to feedback from you all, from our stakeholders in the community, et cetera. I believe that the budgeted expense we are presenting you is at best a 50-50 shot of how much we'll spend next year. 50% of the time we're going to spend more than it, and 50% of the time we're going to spend less than it. And it's all just data driven. How far can we go? Whatever the data tells us. And so again, we're doing a lot of analysis to figure out how much are people consistently spending? How much vacancy do we consistently have? How much turnover savings do we consistently have? It's all numbers and analysis. It's not as much opinion. it's driven by those computations. And so what we're presenting today is our best guess of a budget that is not the full authorization to spend. It is an estimated spend that is smaller than the full authorization.
So I might jump in and repeat. That was, as we were talking here back and forth a little bit, I just wrote down like a summary that I think makes some sense.
I'm going to click through to the appendix while you speak.
Okay, what I would say is that we, as Brenna mentioned at the beginning, she and Brian now are building their third budget for Jeffco. It's a complicated budget with hundreds of different budget builders and then budget managers. And everybody's making budget or expenditure decisions all the time, every day. And some people are overspending and some people are underspending, and we're monitoring this, and it's in real time. We got to a place where we are now comfortable in increasing our assumptions on our underspend, right? And so those things could be, they include the vacancy rates that we have across positions. They include contingency accounts that we know people have had in their budgets that then maybe they don't use because it wasn't really, a contingency is not necessarily something that you have a purpose for, right? So pushing people to really be clear in their allocation of how they're planning to spend as they build their budget. It could be turnover savings where we have 275 retirees and 100, year one, step one teachers. And we've talked about that with JCEA quite a bit. And it just could be in other categories of budget where managers just aren't spending their full amount on an annual basis. And, every year that underspend, contingency, allocation, all of those things change year over year over year over year. And so these big spreadsheets that Brenna's talking about is as we get year over year experience with the Jeffco patterns and trends of budgeting and is my mic driving you guys crazy? Okay. I'm going to try to sit over. I know you don't have to sit up close. It's over here now. Huh?
Is there a mic on?
I think it's just really loud.
I can turn it down.
Yeah, maybe just hit the volume a little. No, that's okay. I can tell it's hot.
I can hear it.
Hot mic. I know. I think it's more on. Okay, a lot of echo. So I guess my point is that we're noticing patterns and trends in the budgeting and then expenditure of those budgets over multiple years and feeling more confident that we can make assumptions of underspend at higher rates than we had in the past. And I'm just going to be really transparent and honest. We've had very direct conversations about when COVID funds came in, we grew our fund balance quite a bit because the district was offsetting expenditures given that they had all this grant money, and then we didn't even spend all the grant money because frankly, we weren't in school. So people weren't spending. We grew the fund balance. We know it's high. The board has made some decisions, for example, Fletcher Miller on one-time investments to pull that down. And in addition, but the last 3 years, we really have everything that's come in the door, we have spent, right? We aren't continuing to grow it, which is a good thing. And I know the board has had really important conversations with us about let's also pull it down over time, but be responsible in how we do that. So I would just say that this 20 that you see on the slide is really an increase in our assumption on underspend across multiple areas within the overall budget model. Right.
And I'm now in the appendix in slide 52. This is a Venn diagram that might or might not help illustrate the three kind of numbers that the board is being asked to grapple with. One will be a total appropriation, which is the big gray circle. The orange circle is effectively what are we telling schools and departments they can spend. And the green circle is going to be our budget, our actual estimated spend. And so this helps sort of visualize that the green circle is smaller and nested within the total appropriation, but you will be giving authorization in June for a total appropriation in excess of our budget to allow for contingency and to allow for unknowns that are unpredictable, because now our budget is just an estimate. It's not an upper limit. So I'll go back and everyone close your eyes because I'm going to go quick.
I was going to say, go ahead. Go, Mary, go.
Yes, I just wanted to ask about the messaging of that kind of thing, because we always hear that we never spend our full budget. And so we have little asterisk at the bottom of every slide presentation we have. This includes contingency or,
Thank you. You've articulated a concern I have, which is that, again, on an intuitive level, most people budget and think of budget as a maximum. And I'm a little concerned that in shifting our paradigm, some people who aren't in the weeds with us, and truly, I appreciate the recommendation from our stakeholders to make our budget closer to our actuals. I appreciate it. And parents may not have that intuitive understanding of why that's valuable. And when we do overspend our budget, and I believe there's a very significant chance that we will, some people may see that as a bad thing. And so through this presentation and others, and in my comments today, in whatever way you all would like, we will continue to work on messaging this. We're happy to work with comms on anything that might be helpful for our school community to understand why we have budget as an estimate and then a separate total authorization. So in summary, we're going to look at the general fund expenditures by account type, and I'm going to preview that we're going to present the general fund two different ways, but this is the first way. So what is an account type? Account types are salaries, benefits, service accounts, which by the way includes utilities, materials and supplies, capital outlays, transfers. We are forecasting that the general fund expenses will increase by 3%. So if you recall, revenue was increasing by 3.5%. From the revised budget of $911 million to a proposed budget of $956 million. That's a year-over-year change of $45 million, which again is a 5% increase. On a per student level, and we are required by statute to state our budget in terms of per student, that represents a $15,000 annual investment in each student in district-run schools. Yes?
Yeah, I have back on the slide you just had. What about things like contracts for consulting, like we had for the SBB, we had that, those things. I know that they are not in one place, but how could we see an aggregate of them or know what percentage they represent?
Sure. If you're okay with it, since I think you actually want a specific number, which I'm happy to bring you. May I bring it in June? Yep. Okay. Because I'm happy to, it's in service accounts, but breaking out service accounts by different types of things is what we'll bring you in June. Thank you.
Sorry. This is, again, I see we have capital outlay and transfers. So that's where all of our other funds play.
So capital outlay, as you can see, is teeny tiny.
Yes,
it's
that's
like
why I was
$1
like,
million.
that doesn't make sense.
It just means that sometimes our departments and our schools invest in something like a workstation, and it hits the general fund because it's out of their department budget, but it's teeny tiny.
So we're still only talking general fund, no other
This
funds.
is still just general fund. Now the transfers are funds moving out to the other funds, but we're not going to be there just yet. We will get there. Okay. So just a quick note about the difference between account type and program type. And I think this may be important and informative for some of the folks who spoke with you last night. An account type describes the service or commodity obtained as, this is like a very economic definition, as the result of a specific expenditure. So again, account type is salary, benefits, contracted or purchased services, materials and supplies. So that's like a category of things. Program type is expenditures to accomplish a set of programmatic objectives. So common program types that we use in education are instruction support, special education instruction, etc. These are not the same thing. The program type instruction is not made up entirely of the account type salaries. So year-over-year changes in our instruction budget may or may not indicate year-over-year changes in our salaries. They may also indicate changes in materials. They may also indicate changes in services, etc. These two things are not the same. Here's an example. School has made 3 purchases totaling $16,000. They're all technology purchases. This is a simplified example. Under account type reporting, they all show up as supplies and materials, $16,000. Under program type, you see that the fact that one of the laptops was going to the principal puts it in general administration. Some of the devices were one-to-one devices in a classroom. That puts it in general instruction. Other devices, Mimeo boards, were in this example to be used for our special education classrooms and therefore becomes a special education program expense. So it's very important to remember that in any year, we're moving different types of expenses in and out of programs. Sometimes that's because of grant funding. So for example, you heard me mention earlier that we bought a tremendous amount of curricular materials with our ESSER grant. That pulls an expense out of instruction in the general fund and puts it in instruction in the grants fund, because that's how we use grant money to pay for it. So if you just look at year-over-year instruction expense, because we've used grant funds to pay for it, it no longer shows up in the general fund, right? So that type of thing is happening all the time. It's really important for us that you know transparently what's happening across both dimensions. And so Brian's going to walk you through the proposed budget broken out a little bit. So we're going to overlay the two so that you can start to see within a program how much of that program is actually salaries, et cetera. It's also a financial presentation that we're going to experiment with going forward to provide that level of analysis so that folks don't confound these two things. Oh, here's one more. Brian pointed out, this is my slide. This is our general fund budget restated by program type with a year-over-year comparison. And you can see that the largest program increases by program type are in special education instruction, instructional support, and then transfers, but that's not a program type, et cetera. So I think it's helpful to see it this way. And we shouldn't over-infer what that means about people, because we're not looking at salaries and benefits, et cetera. There's a lot of different moving parts here. Yes.
For the transfer lines, I'm just trying to look at this from just a parent's perspective.
Of course.
Is there any use in breaking that down further to show capital transfers versus any other kind?
Yes, and all the supporting detail attached to board docs, and in every detailed presentation, we always break out the transfer line. In summary, for the moment, just so folks understand, much of that increase is related to comp increases that are paid out in the Food and Nutrition Services Fund, the Transportation Fund, the Technology Fund, all these funds where we pay people. When we talk about comp increases, they push out to those funds. There is a capital investment increase reflected in that line, but by no means is the $11 million a capital transfer increase. It's not. There are other increases in transfers to other funds that represent investments in our people that build that. And it is broken out in part of the attachments, and we're happy to present detail.
Yeah, I just want to add to that a little bit. These transfers outside of capital reserve, as Bretta mentioned, we have technology, early childhood,
Transportation, food and nutrition services.
Yeah, and food and nutrition services. Some of those, transportation, IT, and early childhood, or childcare and early childhood are going to be moving into the general fund. That's the revised budget, and not revised, what do you call it? Amended budget in September-ish that we'll be talking to you about. And I do think that will help with the transparency on that line. because there'll be fewer transfers going out and more things accounted for in the general fund.
Okay, and with that, the superintendent stole some of my thunder for slide number 48.
All right. So let me test this again. Okay, everybody can hear me now? All right. All right. So as Brenna mentioned a second ago, we want to walk through a combination of how account and program can work together in our account strings and kind of show you how this kind of works. So I want to kind of give you a little overview of the layout before reviewing the information on the next 3 slides. So what we have here is the account is the overall amount. So the salary and benefit of total compensation is $761 million. That's the account type and the total for those two together. All right. Then we also rolled in instruction and support programs all together to help with the simplification of this graph. And we also combined general administration and school administration together, those 2 program types. All right. So within the total salary and benefits, $606 million, or 80%, is made up of instruction and support program types. This includes, but is not limited to, teacher salaries, sped school and support staff salaries, paraprofessional salaries, and coaching stipends. $58 million is in operation and maintenance program types. Some examples of these salaries would include custodians, security, and trade technicians. And $97 million, or 13%, is for school and general administration. Some of examples for these salaries would include principals, assistant principals, school secretaries, and central office staff, i.e. the budget office. All right, so what we're trying to say here is that only 80% of salary and benefits goes to instruction and support programs. Do it? Oh, or 80%, right. 7% for operation maintenance and 13% for school and administration.
And I have a question too, because I think when we're talking about the negotiations going on, and they put their slides up about administration cost, admin cost being so high, it would be nice to see what part of that $97 million is actually central office staff, because I think the general public thinks school secretaries, principals, and assistant principals are their guys, their people, their concern. You know what I'm saying? And that it's the ivory tower that they think is so big. So I would like to know if we could break that 13% down a little bit more and get that 80% higher.
Yes, we can. Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to go into service accounts. I'm going to give a little definition next to what the account type is. So this is for contracts and services within the district. So the total 24-25 service accounts budget is $81 million. This consists of instruction support programs of $30 million, or 37%. Some example of these expenses include software purchases, food tuitions, and game officials. Operation and maintenance is also $30 million, or 37% of the total service account expense. A few of the major budget expenses here are utilities and building repairs. General and school administration is $21 million, and the largest budgeted item here is a payment to the IT fund for IT services for the entire district. Okay, so for this slide, we combined material and supplies and capital outlay because it was such a small $1 million in the budget, so we combined those together. The total FY24-25 budget for these goods and assets is $27 million. 89%, or $24 million, is budgeted in instruction and support programs. A few budgeted items within this category, as mentioned earlier, as Brenna mentioned, is the one-point devices, district curriculum purchases, copier usage, which is a lot more than people would actually think in the district, instructional equipment and materials, and also athletic supplies. Operation and maintenance is only $3 million of this budget, or 11%. A few budget examples here are maintenance supplies, building improvements, and uniforms. Okay, so here's the general fund summary that shows both revenue and expense by account type together to show the anticipated fund use for FY 24-25. With total budgeted revenue of $946 million and total budget expenses totaling $956, we are estimating a fund use of $10 million for the proposed budget. Also provided in the general fund summary table is a year-end projection for FY 23-24. We are estimating that the district has a fund gain of around $5 million, which is up $1 million from the FY 23-24 revised budget. Okay, so here's the other side of the coin for the general fund summary by program type. This is showing the same information but by program view. Again, this is showing a projected fund use of $10 million in FY 24-25 proposed budget.
Sorry, maybe you said this. Does that include the compensation increase that we've been talking about?
It includes a step and a 4% COLA, and it includes some, but not all, of other types of adjustment, and it includes a version of health insurance increase that was current 2 weeks ago.
Is this different? Is this what we had on that slide that we saw yesterday? Okay, it's less.
I'm going to just repeat what I said earlier because I think it's really important for you to hear that. Can you go back to, I know it's a lot of slides, but this is important for all board members, and Danielle, I want to make sure you get this. Yeah, on this slide where it says what it includes, this proposed budget assumes what we have offered to JCEA and that the latest offer, step and step equivalent plus a 4% COLA, some additional compensation pieces that are things we're bargaining still, and this $4.2 million, which is $50 more a month on a flat rate. It does not include the conversation that our bargaining team had with JCEA's bargaining team last night, and the sort of proposed language around shifting to a percentage-based contribution model for benefits. That would increase that 4.2.
That 10 million of expected use, isn't that a lot lower than
Going back to the other slide.
So again,
in the scenarios that
any
we've seen?
numbers presented to the board in executive session or for your consideration. The proposed budget is built on the assumptions we just listed.
So right now, we had to build this while at the same time we're flying the bargaining plane, right? And because it's not built in here. Are you on this program type slide? Can you say specifically what question?
What I'm wondering is if, where I'm hesitating is what we saw in executive session. Should I not be talking about it? Because it was in an executive session? Okay.
I'd be happy to answer some offline questions. Yep.
We're in a position here where we have information that supposedly we shouldn't be saying in public yet, but it affects this. And I do think, at least since part of this is public, so clearly it's going to be more than 10 into reserves because of the negotiations that occurred last night.
There was nothing agreed upon last night. We discussed the idea of moving to a percentage-based with JCEA, given that that's what
We can't
asked
say
for.
specifically what we discussed because that was executive session, but we can say it's going to be more than 10.
Correct. I mean, yes, and I don't have the number. I mean, frankly, I'd just say it if I had the numbers in front of me. We don't have to, but it's more than what's here. And because that 4.2 million assumption on benefits from the earlier slide that I just went back to will increase if we go to a percentage-based benefits model. And it will make sure that increase happens again the next year, which I believe is what our employee associations have been asking us for, which is why we put on the table a different way to think about it at the bargaining table yesterday, just to get the conversation started.
I just want to add in here, I think what's really important to mention is that this is a snapshot and that we will have another chance to look at this in about a month where we will have more actuals that reflect what is actually going to happen. This is a snapshot of right now based on a set of assumptions. And then we will have
a very different question. I totally understand every single thing that we just said, so I will ask it later.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. All right. So as we mentioned earlier, the proposed budget is a set of guardrails and is an estimate which includes many assumptions for several key variables that are beyond the district's control. So with any estimate, there's a potential that one or more of the assumptions will not be correct. Presented here are two scenarios for the year-end potentials for FY 24-25 and the impact to the district. The first scenario is if revenue comes in 2% higher and expenses come in 2% lower than budget, it could produce a fund balance gain of $28 million, a difference of $38 million difference from the 24-25 proposed budget. On the other hand, if revenue comes in 1% lower and expenses come in 1% higher than budget, it could produce a fund balance use of $29 million, a $19 million difference from FY 24-25 proposed budget. So very slight differences of the size of our district can cause major swings within our fund use or fund gain. Okay, so we've covered a lot of information. I want to know if you have any other additional questions that we've been talking through the whole time, but we're going to open up for questions.
I just want to say something. As a person who's worked with young kids, I really, for the listening public, for people who are still confused by program versus account breakout, which is what we're going to be doing now, in my mind, just so I can explain it out loud for myself and maybe for some other folks, this is like when you spill out a bunch of colored building blocks with kids, right? You've got 10 blocks on the floor. Some of them are triangles. Some of them are squares, some of them are circles, right? And then some of them are green and some of them are blue, right? You still always have 10 items, right, that you're looking at. It's just how are you classifying them? Are you coordinating them by shape or are you looking at it by color? Is this accurate the way that I'm explaining it to you? Yeah.
Sounds like a great t-shirt design. I can't wait.
Thank you. I drew a picture in my notes here just for myself because just to be clear, the numbers at the end up being, it's the same budget. We're looking at it in two different ways and how the expenditures are getting broken out. And I just think for folks who aren't familiar with sort of being in the weeds and looking at budgets in this way, that's really important because there's sometimes a narrative that the numbers that we're using up here at the table aren't the ones that are being reflected from other people in the community. And it really matters if we're talking whether are we classifying things by account or by program, the numbers that are being used. And I think that can cause confusion, but I think we also, all of us up here, can be clear that at the end of it, the budget number, the allocation numbers always ends up being the same. It's just how are you looking at the numbers broken out? And I hope that's a talking point that we can use moving forward when we're talking with community, when there's confusion about what's happening with budget versus allocation versus program versus account. That I think that's going to be a conversation we have to have over and over and over again. There you go.
I thought this was excellent. Thank you. I really do appreciate now this breakdown of program and account and then showing the same numbers or the same overall budget, but in two different ways, formats and stuff. So thank you.
Great. So I think we are running a little bit longer than anticipated, which means I've officially lost a bet to Lisa Relu. We will pick up the pace, but we also don't want to shortchange your questions. So please continue to interject whenever, but we will try and go just a little bit faster. And with that, Shaunene's going to take us to.
Thank you. Oh. Is it on? Great. All right, Capital Reserve Fund. This is a permanent fund, separate than the general fund, that exists for capital projects like facility repairs, renovations, equipment purchases, and other capital investments. So we're going to go through today all the different expenses that we're expecting, uses of capital reserve funds that we're expecting in the FY 24-25 budget and beyond. This slide is provided just to give you a little bit of a roadmap of the next couple slides that I'm going to go through. We have some green bars that are listed at the top. These are indicating our annual capital maintenance programs. These are often referred to as our mini programs. And these are designated with the number, which is the year that the programs start. And the little m is just designating that it's a mini program. You can see that most of these mini programs by design, and we've been doing these for many years, are cover 2 fiscal years. And they start the bidding process in the fall, and then they can go up to 2 years, so they cross 2 budget years. So we have to budget for them separately, but they're going to cross over 2 years. So you can see for the 24-25 budget year, we're going to have a partial of the 24M mini programs and a partial of the 25 mini programs. And I'll go into more detail in a couple more slides. The blue bars are our special large projects. You are familiar with these. And again, I'll have a slide that goes into a little more detail. And then at the bottom in the pink is our multi-year capital plans. You're familiar with the 2018 CIP program that we're winding down, and then we're looking forward to a future multi-year capital plan in the next year or two.
I have a question.
Yes.
For the special large projects, the Aquatic Center and Fletcher Miller are actual buildings. You can see them being built and so forth. The ERP project, I'm having a hard time putting that into a building. So how does that fit here?
In a couple more slides, let me go into a little more detail, and then hopefully I'll answer your question. All right, so for those green bars at the beginning, those annual capital maintenance, and I mentioned this previously, that for the FY25 proposed budget, we're going to have expected spending that's related to the tail end portion of the 24 mini programs and then the starting of the 25 mini programs. For the FY25 budget, this total is approximately $10 million for both of those mini programs. And the projects that are included with this year over year are those that I'm listing up above. These are really those facility maintenance projects to keep our buildings functioning to support our students and our staff. In addition, if we have other things like creating a multi-year capital plan, we're going to include the expense around that service. We also have contingency within that mini program. And specific for the FY25 budget, we are adding a $1.2 million contingency towards roof repairs that's related to storm damage. And the reason for this is so that then if we do have a hail damage incident in the district, it's not going to impact projects that we already have in the pipeline. So it's not going to change budget, and we already have a line item set aside to cover that damage without impacting timelines of projects that are in place. Special large projects. So we have a portion, because these projects cover multi-years as well. So a portion of each of these projects is in the FY25 budget. We have the Arvada Aquatic Center that was originally approved in the winter of 2021. The design phase was done in 2022, and we're hoping that that pool will be open in the fall of this year. At the Fletcher Miller School, we already have the design completed for that, and the hope is that we can start construction on that project in July and going into the fall of next year. As you're aware, that project is actually funded through 3 sources. So a portion of it is from our 2018 CIP funds. We are hoping to get the BEST grant to support that project, and then the rest will come out of the Capital Reserve Fund. The ERP project, or the Enterprise Resource Planning System upgrade, is to replace PeopleSoft. So this is originally part of our strategic plan for Thrive 2025. It is to replace our HR and finance systems that support operations of the district. So while it's not necessarily a physical touch like an HVAC system, it is a support system that's used to support district operations and is, from an accounting perspective, classified as capital. So that's why we're including it as part of a capital project.
Thank you for that. I'd be interested to know if there's any kind of software programs or, anything that's not tangible, any other things that are not tangible that are not in the capital program.
So you capitalize investments in technology under a few different scenarios. Some of the tech purchased in our tech fund is capitalized, meaning we pay for it over multiple years. Even if we put it in service at one moment in time, we're still paying for it later. So there are other pieces of technology that have been capitalized in other funds. There are also things that we buy as software as a service, sometimes on a multi-year agreement. And accounting rules require that we sort of treat that as a capitalized asset, but we're still realizing an annual expense for it. It's not technically a capital asset. In a governmental fund, you don't track capital assets, which is why we put many of them in the capital reserve fund. So the answer to your question is yes and yes. There are both other technology items that are capitalized in other funds, and yes, there are other technology items that are not capitalized that do extend over multiple years.
In general, are most of them capitalized or varies?
It varies. It's a large-scale project like an ERP implementation. Much of the cost is one-time in nature, and so it fits best in a capital reserve fund, which is really set aside for larger, one-time in nature or lumpy expenses. As I think Ms. Rosario is doing a great job of explaining, they're often multi-year budgets that are biggish, and they represent a big investment at one time that then, you realize over time. If we put that in the general fund, it would overstate our expenses for next year because it's really not recurring in nature. So it's best to put it in this fund.
Thank you. So our next category of capital investments is our multi-year capital plans. Again, we have just been completing the 2018 CIP program and then drafting our new multi-year future-looking capital plan. In summary, as we was presented in April of 2024 at the CAC meeting, the Capital Asset Advisory Committee, Jeffco has initiated 95% of the projects they set out to do as part of that 2018 CIP program. And 95% of those programs is 352 projects. So we have initiated 95% or 352 projects under that CIP program as of April of 2024. These projects that are listed on the slide up here are the ones that are either going to be completed, initiated, or are kind of in midstream during the FY 24-25 budget. So it's part of the budget that I'm presenting this evening or this afternoon. And again, we've said it many times, but the capital planning spans multi-budget years. And we have to kind of segment it for budget purposes, but look at it in the long term as a large multi-year project. Here's a summary of what we are proposing for the budget for FY 24-25. That first column in the gray is what we're projecting for this current year, 23-24, from a sources perspective and from a uses perspective. So we have funds that are coming in here as a transfer from the Capital Reserve Fund. We have an additional assigned reserve transfer that was allocated by the Board of Education in the fall of 2023. And we have other sources of funds into here, including interest, potential sales proceeds, grants, and fees for fees in lieu for lands in our district. The uses are very similar to what I outlined up above. It is including all of what I outlined up above, either in the non-CIP or the CIP programs that we talked about. And in addition, out of this fund, we also have to pay debt and interest on our payments. Yes?
Really quick, when we're thinking about this, should we assume that there is a balance coming into the 23-24 capital reserve?
It'll be my next slide. You're one slide ahead of me. And then looking forward to 24-25, as we're finishing up the 2018 CIP, we see that for the 24-25 budget, the CIP line is increasing from $23 million expected this year to $38 million next year. And then same with the non-CIP, the $19 million increasing to $39. There's a lot of this spend is related to those special large projects that I mentioned earlier. Fletcher Miller is a large portion of this. And then we see that going forward, what we would like to do is stabilize within the Cap Reserve Fund, where we're using the sources that we get for the year to match what we're spending during the year. So we want to see it going like that in future years. We're just in this bridge year period where we're kind of having this influx of projects and finishing out the CIP. Yes.
So in that proposed budget 24-25, since our total uses exceeds our total sources, that's the bridge year you referred to. But so how are we paying for the difference?
I might show you that on the next slide, but also consider that one of the big drivers of that is that we're doing the Fletcher Miller assigned reserve transfer this year in 23-24. So you can see the 15 million coming in this year, and then we're going to be spending it next year. So that's one of them that's kind of driving that disconnect between years.
What happens when we have unexpected expenses that come up all the time? Is that number 81 will just go up? This has been
The hope is no.
Okay.
The way we're budgeting it within those mini programs is we are having a list of things that we hope to accomplish based on our priorities. But we also have contingency in there for the unexpected, for projects that come up along the way. And then on top of that, we're putting $1.2 million in there for a reserve for hail damage. So if we have any damage come through the district, that we can use that money for it. So we are hoping, the way we've built this, we're considering both what we anticipate spending on and the priorities of the district, and have money set aside for what we don't know yet.
I think that's the question I keep asking when we come up with consent agenda. So I'm always curious, like, oh, are we getting into that percent that we didn't expect? And like, so I'm always wondering how much of that percent, so maybe this is next year, are we spending and how much is left? So when we're voting yes or no on something, that's where I'm always a little lost, where I'm like, oh, how far are we going into that contingency and what's left? It's just eyes on that helps a lot, or just visibility.
Absolutely. And that really is part of the reason that I know Jeff's team builds in contingency into every project budget, is it's expected. And part of the reason that Shawneen and her new capital finance team exist is to help monitor that budget. So we have lots of staff eyes on the budget, so that when you pass a budget either in June or in January and authorize the expenditure, we're constantly tracking whether the expenditures as they happen are going to exceed the budget. And the quarterly reports we provide are a great way to see whether or not we're actually tracking overall to exceed the budget. But essentially every contract we bring to you, unless we say otherwise, is within budget. It's within the appropriation.
And then I think this goes to the question that a few of you were asking. So this slide is really looking at where does the cap reserve fund start with a fund balance, and then taking those same sources and uses from the prior slide and then showing where the ending fund balance is. We are being mindful that the ending fund balance has to maintain a minimum balance of $58.9 million that's currently budgeted for 2 new schools from the 2018 CIP program. So we do not want to spend those funds on anything other than what it had been previously approved for. And so this, I think, goes to Director Applegate, what you were asking. So this year, yes, next year, yes, we will be spending more than what's coming in, but we had been building previous years. We had been building up the fund balance, knowing that there was a commitment in 2018 CIP program that a portion of that was going to be funded out of this cap reserve fund.
I have a question about those 2 new schools. For how long do you keep in projections or, placeholders until the board figures we're not going to be using those funds? And then once you might make that determination, how do you handle it?
I think that's a discussion that we can have, and it's really until I have a designation from you guys for otherwise.
I just am asking for the procedure. I mean, I just want to know how it would happen.
So when an assigned reserve effectively gets created by board action, so board action would, for example, be approving the 2018 CIP in totality as a budget for a set of projects to complete. And that kind of created over time this assigned reserve. It would take another explicit board action to then say, release from assignment the monies you are holding. And so procedurally, we can bring that to you at any point via resolution. It's convenient and effective for us if it's part of a budget discussion. So opportunities could include the amended budget, the January revised budget. But again, in terms of what happens in front of that, there's a lot of other folks that get involved in that process. But from a monetary lens, I would always encourage you to make those types of decisions when we draft those formal resolutions for your review and approval.
And I would just say, Mary, I know the board has expressed, several board members have expressed interest in having the conversation and better understanding how do we get to some sort of decision to either continue to save it or to not. And then if you're not going to, are there investments that need to be made with those funds? And if so, where and what? Lisa and I are working on that through the boundary study work. So that's where that intersects the strategic facilities plan, longer term. Longer term. But I do believe that our plan is, as you come back in August and we move into the fall of next school year, we will have a plan for how to begin those conversations for the board.
Okay, and then should it be something that we want to do something about, it would be next budget, next year, around this time that we would start to contemplate it?
You also have the January revised budget. So if you'll recall your decision around Fletcher Miller, for example, we discussed it in October, November, but it didn't become really formalized into the assigned reserves of the system until the January revised budget. And again, it's just because we try to load all the things at once. Otherwise, it sort of messes everything up. So January is an option, maybe even September when we bring you the amended, although we're going to be scurrying to get that ready in time, so maybe not.
Will that come as the decision on that investment come to us as a vote? Like yes or no, we're going to build a school or not?
I don't know that I have a good answer to that question right now. As I mentioned before, the boundary study and the information that Shanine's team is working on with Jeff's team around enrollment patterns and trends is the analysis we're doing right now. And so we're working on it. I don't have an answer to your question right now. I think at some point there will need to be board action for those funds that are reserved for this purpose to be unreserved. And allocated for a different purpose. So nothing can happen right now with those funds unless there's board action, nor would that ever occur. It's a big, important decision that the board must be part of.
Okay, so we're going to hop right into some of the remaining funds within Jeffco. Okay, we're start off with the Student Transportation Fund. Something I'm going to mention here, point out the funds that do receive a transfer from the general fund. So Transportation Fund does receive majority of their revenue from the general fund through a transfer. The Transportation Fund is increasing around $1 million or 3% due to investments in small non-CDL required buses and then also a green fleet, which is great, which the goal here is to reduce the dependence on contracted car services. Also, during the 24-25 budget development process, transportation grew the dispatch team to improve communication between the district and the community. Okay, Food Nutrition Services Fund. The Healthy School Meals for All provides all students access to breakfast and lunch at no cost to the families. This new program has resulted in an increased meal participation. I can't say that word very well. Sorry about that. Breakfast participation has increased about 56% and lunch has increased on 42%. This increase has also caused the increase for staff and food cost. This is reflected in the 24-25 budget of around the $1 million increase.
And I have a question about the Food Nutrition Services Fund. The snack carts that we have, which are the part of the food that the kids pay for, how is that related to this fund?
So what you're looking at is the expenditure budget right now. So the expenses related to healthy snacks are the purchase of the item and then the staff that helps make the item available, if you will. So that's how it's showing up in this graph. These are just expenses. There's also a revenue component that's separate. We do have the full revenue and expense in the attachments, and it will be part of the total appropriation where you see, is there any difference between the two? But it's just in there.
And there's a lot of talk about the snack cards. And so is that something in the future we'll see? Like, what can the board do about it? I don't know how much of a profit it makes, how integral to the whole food and nutrition program it is, and how would we make adjustments to it?
So I'd be happy to connect with my colleague, Jeff Gatlin, who oversees food and nutrition services. I think some of what you're asking is decisions about how money gets spent and what programming we offer. Obviously, in the budget team, we don't make those decisions. So I'd be happy to connect with him and see if he and Beth could chat with the board about those items.
I will just tell you that I've asked this question before, and I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. It's somewhere in something that they sent me, but it's in the millions in terms of the revenue that comes in from that program. I will also just say I've actually had this interesting conversation at barbecues or, socially with friends, and I often hear what we don't hear sometimes here, which is, I want my kid to be able to pick something after lunch, and I don't want the district to tell me that my kid can't have that snack. So we'll look into it. We'll check in with Jeff. We'll get the board an update and make sure you know what kind of revenue comes in, and maybe we can also just get you some more context about the program itself. Would that be helpful? Okay, we'll do that.
Can I ask a quick question? And if this is something we should talk about offline, just tell me. When I was looking at the budget book and I pulled up food services because we've got it up, there's all these, and at the bottom we've got all of our reserves, we've got total appropriation, and then we've got unappropriated, unassigned revenues. So the engineer is not an accountant. What are unassigned reserves in the individual funds if they're not tied to Tabor or ops? And how does that sit? And if this is an offline question, just tell me and I'm happy to.
It's a great question. So here we're showing just the budgeted expenses, right? So there's the middle part kind of there, right? And then we have appropriated reserves, and then we might have some operational reserves we appropriate to kind of give just in case they reach to their levels of overspending, right? We have a little bit of reserves there, but then we have unassigned reserves. Unassigned reserves are essentially part of the fund balance that isn't appropriated, essentially.
When you say the fund balance, you're talking about the Food and Nutritional Services Fund.
Yes, each individual fund. So each individual fund, each page will have something like that.
Is that in when we talk about this 200 million number that gets thrown around, are those included in that? No. Okay. It's pretty significant for food and nutritional services.
And remember, I just want to add, last night when Shawneen did the third quarter review for this fiscal year, she talked about the food services fund. We believe possibly overspending into that fund balance this school year. And so it is a fund that we're watching to see if they go into this, unappropriated, unassigned reserves of about $12 million. And the Healthy School Meals for All has sort of had this impact on our food nutrition services team we're still trying to figure it out. A lot more kids are taking advantage of that program than we expected, which is wonderful. And it's sort of having an impact on the amount of expenditures that they're experiencing this year. And then Shawneen, please jump in because I know you.
Let me ask a question because that all makes sense. And I think this answer is similar to what you were saying before, Brenna. If Ms. Copeland, sorry, if the board wanted to say, let's move some of those funds back to pay for other things, no, we can't do that.
And particularly in this fund, most of the fund balance has been built up via the USDA reimbursement for meals, and they have very strict requirements that may only be used over time for food and nutrition services.
What about the campus activities fund, which also has a $12 million unassigned revenue or reserves?
No.
Okay.
Those have been collected for specific purpose, and they have to go to that purpose.
So not for now, but I'd be really curious in the future what we can do with those funds to offset other costs to allow us to put things towards account.
Yeah, and if you'll recall with the revised budget, Brian and I included a transfer from the property management fund, for example,
Yes.
into the capital reserve
Yep.
fund. So the property management fund is actually set up as like a little mini business where we rent out our facilities. And then in order to use those proceeds towards facility repairs, which are necessary after we rent them out sometimes, it goes into capital reserve and it helps pay for those maintenance items. So there are certain types of funds where we can do that and certain where we can't. And it's a mix of state statute and accounting rules.
Thank you. Sorry for the.
Good question.
Okay, so we're going to the Employee Benefits Fund, not to be confused with the Employee Benefit Account that we reviewed earlier today. It's very confusing for us too. So this is the fund that pays for the self-insured medical plan claims for dental and vision and the Aetna health insurance claims. This fund excludes the Kaiser Health and Para. The budget is increasing $4 million next year to cover increased insurance costs and potential claims. The Insurance Reserve Fund receives a majority of its revenue from the general fund via transfer. Is a fund authorized by the state law to allow the district to maintain an insurance reserve for self-insured purposes and to fund liability workers' compensation and property insurance premiums. For FY 24-25, the Insurance Reserve Fund reallocated existing budget to allow the funds to absorb insurance premium and inflationary increases. The Technology Fund receives the majority of its revenue also from the general fund, manages the many technology services, infrastructure support, and maintenance to provide technology services and solutions across the entire district. The technology budget is growing around $2 million next year. This does include a budgetary movement of a team from the general fund to the IT fund, which is a net zero impact to the district. And the expansion, one of the major investments they had this year was the expansion of the Tech for Ed One Phone Device program. The Child Care Fund, we're identifying this as the ECE and SAE Fund, is a child care fund which currently includes both ECE, otherwise known as UPK, and also SAE, which is the district's brand after-school program. The fund budget is increasing $4 million, which includes investments for new curriculum, modifications to school configurations, and student placements.
So is it accurate that the SAE, is that like its own little business too?
Yes, and that's why this fund is structured as an enterprise fund. It's also why we need to pull ECE out of it because ECE is no longer an enterprise.
That was my question as to why they were together, because I thought they were different, so that makes a ton of sense. Thank you.
They used to be back before the state was funding it.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, well, that question leads right into our next slide here about fund consolidation. I'm going to turn it over to Brenna.
So who knew this was going to be the most popular and anticipated slide in the whole deck? Yes, we are consolidating transportation, the preschool portion of the child care fund. So preschool does actually include 3-year-old and 4-year-old. 4-year-old is the UPK. 3-year-old is also important services, and information technology. Now, if you were listening just a slide or two ago and you heard Brian say we're moving a part of the general fund into technology, yes, here's the second part of this. Then we're moving technology back into the general fund. That is our world. We just move it back and forth all the day long. There will be no change to the total district-wide appropriation through this. This is an accounting change. However, we will need to restate the general fund budget because there's some specific fund revenues. There's a little bit of revenue that goes straight from the state into the child care fund. There's a little bit of revenue that goes straight from the state into transportation. I think that amount is like $5 million. The child care portion is probably closer to like 20-ish million. Is that right? Those two numbers will appear as kind of net adds to general fund revenue when we consolidate. But again, we will not be changing budgets. We're just pulling them all together and putting them in one place. So that's what will happen with our amended budget. And as the superintendent alluded to, this will bring, in my opinion, much greater transparency into how we're spending by account and by program within the general fund. And It has the added benefit of bringing us into compliance with how CDE expects us to report, particularly pre-K. So,
I have a question too. When we move those funds into the general fund, there's no chance that it's going to have a spillover into the reserve portion of the general fund to make that infamous $211 million look even bigger and like we've even increased?
As I think Mr. Salmons mentioned earlier, we believe the current year is trending to increase the 212 to 215, 16, something like that. So it will increase a little bit as of the end of this year anyway. That was part of the revised budget that we adopted. Yes, a tiny bit will exist in there that will move in. And it's really important that, the scale of operations will also be increasing. So when we think about that number, I think it's really important to think about, and what's our annual spend out of it, because on a percentage basis, we need a certain cushion. So it will increase a little when we do this fund consolidation, not a lot, because the transportation fund, for example, has almost no fund balance. Pre-K has a small fund balance, not much. Technology has a fund balance, but most of it is not cash. Most of it is going towards depreciation expenses that's happening every year. So those assets will be fully depreciated effectively before it comes into the general fund, so there'll be no impact, if you will. And a portion of the technology fund is going to be moving into the capital reserve fund to help pay for the ERP project. Does that make sense? It's a lot of movement.
It makes sense. I just was anticipating a possible, there you go again, increasing that fund reserve.
I can try and spend it if you'd rather.
I can help you.
Okay, we're in the home stretch, believe it or not. Oh my God, these kids look like they've been looking at multi-year forecasting. So we're going to now go from just a single year to multiple years. We're going to talk through some assumptions, et cetera, so that you understand, where the numbers are coming from. So first we have the Pikes Peak of inflation. These dates are aligned to when did inflation impact our revenue, not when did inflation occur. So for example, if you took Pikes Peak and you shifted it a whole year and a half back, that's really when it was happening. So for example, on the slide up here where we have the 2.7% hovering over 25-26, that's actually current year trending actual inflation. So if you pay attention to all the economic forecasts like we do, you'll know that the current local trending inflation is 2.7%. That's the year-over-year increase in consumer good prices. That won't impact our revenue until the 25-26 school year. So taking into account this kind of lag effect where for next year we're getting that 5% inflation bump to PPR. But then in that forecast you just saw showed that inflation was going back down to historic levels, which we're actually already seeing in the actuals. Once inflation is getting down to about 2.7%, then we've gotten to that spot where the per student increase is no longer enough than the total count decrease. These things are kind of basically offsetting each other. So even though those bars are kind of the same height, 946, 947, 952, they do assume inflation increases of close to 3% per pupil. So a 3% per pupil-ish increase produces a $1 million increase to revenue from FY25 to FY26. So it's really important as we're sort of thinking about how do we plan for that scenario. Just because someone says that's the per pupil increase, that's not our revenue increase. You guys know this. I'm preaching to the choir, sorry. So a little bit more, I'm about to show you the multi-year, just a little bit more about assumptions. We say these first because otherwise you'll look at the numbers and wonder what are the assumptions. We use the Office of State Planning and Budgeting, their projections for inflation Mr. Sammons is very passionate about that. We do not use the legislative council. Yep. Okay. Total program revenue does not increase by the same rate. We've talked about that. The current multi-year view, so the one you're about to see, does not reflect any changes to the school finance formula. The one you will see in June will reflect changes to the school finance formula. Budget stabilization factor. The state had already adopted and indicated that it will go away as of next year. This is the last year that we have any of it. We are not assuming it comes back. Okay? One-time revenue. FY25 will have a little bit of one-time revenue, and we've talked about this in our ESSER 3 conversations. There's a little bit of balance left that we're applying towards general fund expenses. That one-time revenue goes away in FY26, so effectively we kind of got to bump back up our expenses because expenses are a little bit lower than they really should be in FY25 compared to FY26. Actual enrollment, we've already spoken about that. Expenses. So very important assumption on the next slide. Compensation increases in the out years, so in FY26 and FY27. Assume a step and a COLA, and the COLA equals the actual revenue percentage increase. So if the revenue is increasing by 0.1%, which is 1/10 of 1%, then the COLA that we are assuming is 1/10 of 1%. School-based spending is forecasted to decline proportionate to actual enrollment decline. So you may ask, well, are you including cost savings? I hate to say it that way, but nonetheless, when actual enrollment declines, right, because we distribute on a student formula, we're distributing less money. So we're spending less money on a year-over-year basis through our school budgets. That's already baked in. We've included that. That assumption is in there. It's not a separate, on top of this, we'll save money. No, it's already in there. Annual district-wide program investments of $5 million and non-salary inflationary increases. So what is that? That's just a bunch of jargon, which means we have forecasted about $1.6 million in new spending in the out years on things that we can't control the cost of that tend to just go up, that are not people. Correct. Although, as you saw from the materials budget, we don't have any paper towels in this building. Also, the program investments of $5 million, that's just a placeholder assumption. It's a little bit lower than prior year trends, but it just assumes that there's generally always something that we need to do on a year-over-year basis that's new. And then there's one more bump to cap transfer to get it back up to, on a dollar basis, pre-CIP levels. But after that, it's held constant.
Is there some accounting magic to what type of balance we should keep in some of those other funds? Like, is there a balance we want to keep that at? You say to bump it up after we spend. Is there like a magic spot?
Yeah, so we used to have a district policy that actually articulated a target fund balance by fund. We did away with that. And so now we apply our best judgment and whatever rules exist. So our best judgment is generally a minimum of a 4%. But in some of these funds, for example, the insurance risk reserve fund. Oh, Jesus, I just combined two of them. You know the one I'm talking about. I'm going to point to her. It's hers. That one, we need a little bit more balance because we could have a settlement in any given year that we need. So that one we targeted around closer to 10%. So it just varies. And then there's ones where we can't take it out anyway, aka food nutrition services. So in general, we try to go to about 4%, but it does vary. And obviously cap reserve fund, where you saw we had a $127 million fund balance, that's not 4% of anything, but that's a one-time fund. So we build up funds over time in there to then spend them down as planned on a multi-year horizon. So it's a sort of multiple answers for different funds. Aha. So almost there, believe it or not. Second to last slide. In the out years of FY26 and FY27, we are forecasting a 0.1% increase in revenue And so the matching expenditure assumptions assume 0.1% COLA for our employees, all of them. And then I think that next year is what, 0.3% increase? 0.5? 0.5%, 0.5% increase in revenue, then becomes an assumed COLA of 0.5% across all employees in all groups. Even so, you do actually see that the use of fund balance is growing in FY26 and FY27. That's due to some of the things we just spoke of. So, for example, we have to add back those ESSER expenses that we're paying general fund expenses with ESSER in FY25. We got to add them back in FY26. I've talked to you a little bit about the interest rate earnings. The interest rate earnings have to go down over time as we revert to historic levels of interest income. So there's lots of little pieces. And there's the delicate balance of how much does the per student increase exactly offset the funded count decline. So that's why certain things, without changing much of anything at all, change in the out years. So I just want to clarify that. And you can see that where, thank you, Sanders. So we have this forecast. This is what I think someone asked before, is the 211 going to increase? So we had said it would grow to about 215 as of the revised budget in the current year. That goes to 216, drops to potentially 206, then 183, then 155. Now this is on an unconsolidated basis. And this is based on the current assumptions that we've presented today in terms of the current year. So that's the other qualifying item. I've only got one more. This is the South Table Mountain of our general fund balance as opposed to the Pikes Peak of inflation. And so what you're seeing is that the multi-year projection I just showed you is really in this pink part, which creates the other half of the picture, so to speak, where it grew during the first year of the new MLO and the pandemic years of lots of supplemental funding. It stayed flat while Mr. Salmons and I joined the district and did everything we could to spend. And then it's declining over here in the pink years, as it shall be called. Believe it or not, that's it.
So thank you so much. I really like these graphs, but I do know we're over time and we've got something else we're supposed to be doing. So with that, I appreciate that you'll get back to us with some of the other things that we've mentioned. And
Thank you.
yes. So right now I am going to ask, is there a motion for the Board of Education to convene in executive session?
Yes. A motion to convene an executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024FI to discuss a personnel matter, specifically the superintendent evaluation.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved. Oh, is there any comments? It has been moved and seconded that the Board of Education will convene into executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024FI to discuss a personnel matter, specifically the superintendent evaluation. Roll call, please, Ms. Zavada.
Ms. Applegate?
Yes.
Ms. Kenworthy?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Ms. Reed?
Yes.
Dr. Varda?
The board will now convene in executive session, which is closed to the general public. The Board of Education will reconvene in open session.